This video is addressing the topic of fidelity or faithfulness in sexual relationships, which are committed monogamous relationships. And as always, we begin with the motif or with the analogy of ethics being like doing archery, trying to find the bullseye and hit the mark of the bullseye of what we're after. And the bullseye here in ethics is the good, and it's the right, and it's the ought, what we ought to do. I'm going to begin just by making mention of human nature. I had a paper for you that was available in one of your modules on human nature. It's a paper I presented before in 2017 to the Maine Philosophical Institute. And the reason I made it is an optional paper. You didn't have to read it, but the reason I had it in there was for you to see that there's good reason to believe in human nature. There are many philosophers, a number anyway, who deny that there is such a thing. Why do they deny it? Because there's implications of such a thing. If there really is human nature, then there are certain things that would be in our best interest and certain things that would militate against our own best interest. Therefore, human nature would have some normative kinds of implications for ethics, and they don't want that to be the case. They want to be able to make up the rules of life themselves. So, is there such a thing as human nature? My claim is that there is, and my paper has defended that. Why does this matter? So, this is the sociologist and philosopher Christian Smith from Notre Dame. He says the animals we call human beings share an identifiable and peculiar set of capacities and proclivities that distinguish them significantly from other animals on this planet. In the paper that I wrote, I showed that Donald Brown has written a book called Human Universals, where he shows that there's over 200 things that are uniquely human behaviors and characteristics. So this is not a contrivance. This isn't something that was artificially put together. That we do, in fact, as he says, share an identifiable and peculiar set of capacities and proclivities that distinguish us from the other animals on this planet. He goes on to say, despite the vast differences in humanity between cultures and across history, and there are vast differences, no matter how differently people narrate their lives and histories, there remains an underlying structure of human personhood that helps to order human culture, history, and narration. Well, so what? Well, here's what. If there is, in fact, such a thing as human nature, then there are implications of this truth for human sexuality. There are sexual behaviors and actions which would tend to promote human well-being, and there's sexual behaviors which tend to work against our own happiness, although there may be pleasure in the moment that would come from them. Long-term, there's more pain. Thus, if there's truly such a thing as human nature, that fact carries ethical implications for all of us. So this is just a truth. This is a truism. Infidelity or cheating in romantic relationships has devastating consequences. Some of you listening to my voice have been cheated on. And you can say, that's true. That's right. I can say from personal experience that it had a devastating consequence in my life. So having been cheated on can result in anguish, depression, fury, and humiliation, and it's associated with major depression and anxiety. Susan Fraser, she is the most well-known sexual researcher of the latter half of the 20th century, and she did a famous meta-analysis of human sexuality. And she states that based on her cross-cultural research across human societies, extramarital affairs rank just below incest as the most strictly prohibited type of sexual relationships. So when we talk about this realm, long-term monogamous sexual relationships, there's two phenomena here. The one is something that comes to us from the world of biology, and when referring to human beings and human monogamy, in the world of biology we talk about pair bonding. 91% of human beings will look for and find, either permanently or temporarily, a person with whom they will share their life exclusively, sexually and relationally, exclusively. That's a fact. We call that phenomenon pair bonding, that human beings are, by and large, monogamous, and they're looking for a partner to spend their life with. Ultimately, I know that there's a period of time when there's a high level of sexual activity for some during their younger years, but ultimately people tend to settle down and realize this is not what I'm wanting from this aspect of my life. I want more. I want long-term commitment, and I want love, and I want warmth in a home, and all of that. And associated with that biological phenomenon of pair bonding is the phenomenon humanly relationally, socially, and even politically, because it's something that we confirm with governmental processes like marriage licenses, of oath keeping. Interestingly, you can go to a church and make certain marriage vows, or you could go to a justice of the peace and you'll make very similar marriage vows. Essentially, you're going to say something to that other person if you get married of that I'm going to take you as my husband or wife, and I'm going to keep myself to you only, so long as we both shall live. It's going to be for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, till death do us part. That's making an oath. That's making a promise. And we typically have people witness this. We don't do it off somewhere by ourselves. When people run away and they get married by themselves, when they elope, well, it's them and just the person performing the service. But more frequently, people actually do this in front of family and friends and so on. So oath keeping is something that's, there's a weightiness to it. I made a vow to him or her, and I intend to keep my vow. And to get married doesn't make all the good-looking men and women vanish out of the world. Married people didn't suddenly cease to notice that there's other attractive people out there other than their mate, but they made an oath, they made a vow. This is an old song, not from my parents or even it's from my grandparents' generation. I'm 63. From my grandparents' generation, this old song says, I only have eyes for you. Well, that's hard to do, right? I think everybody, no matter what generation they're from, would say that's hard to do, but oath-keeping implies I'm going to try to have that be the case. So this is, ironically, from Bonnie Steinbach. Some of you did not read the page on which Steinbach appeared, and you just went and did the learning log, and you didn't see what I was saying to you. Bonnie Steinbach's numbers are not real. People do not commit adultery at the level that article indicates. That article comes from Cosmopolitan magazine and Red Book magazine, having had people who voluntarily wrote in about their infidelities. That's where the numbers in that article come from. It's not real statistical research. Anyway, Steinbach says this, our view of adultery is connected to our thoughts and feelings about love and marriage, sex and the family, the value of fidelity, sexual jealousy and exclusivity. How we think about adultery will affect the quality of our relationships, the way we raise our children, the kind of society we have and want to have. I think she's spot on when she says that. So question, how might perpetuated myths about the prevalence of adultery negatively affect people's desires for a lasting, happy, faithful, monogamous marriage? Well, I can tell you that having read some of your learning logs, some of you were incensed and angry and very upset and outraged that there was such a high level of infidelity because you didn't read the part that said that that's not accurate. The truth is that the three top researchers in human sexuality of about the last 20-25 years, who are Weiderman, Fraser, and Janowiak, say that worldwide and across the different cohorts of age groups, 23% of men and 12% of women will commit adultery in a marriage relationship. That means less than a quarter of men, no matter what the media portrays, and just a little bit more than 10% of women. I think that's significant. So those of you who got so upset when you thought that Steinbach's numbers were real, what would the effect of that be if you thought that were the case? It would cause you to think that you could never, statistically, there's not a high likelihood of me ever finding a partner who would be faithful to me. I want to say to you folks, if only 23% of men, less than 25%, less than a quarter of men, and 12% of women are unfaithful, actually the numbers are weighted in your favor. You have a good chance of finding a mate who would keep his or her word to you. So when we're talking about this, we're talking about adultery versus fidelity, I want to use an analogy that comes from the world of risk management. I have a background in property and casualty insurances. I used to be a commercial lines property and casualty field underwriter back in the day. And so we had this terminology of friendly fire versus an unfriendly fire. Friendly fire is fire where it's supposed to be. So this is fire in your fireplace or fire in your wood stove, fire on your stove if your stove is a gas stove, fire in your furnace, fire being used as our servant in the places that it belongs. And so this is a safe usage of fire. As over against friendly fire, there's unfriendly fire, which is fire going up the drapes or fire on the carpet, fire where it ought not to be. Sexual intimacy, when we're in an oath bonded, made this promise to one another, the pair bonding was followed up by oath making, and this couple swore vows to each other. For it to be the right usage of our sexuality, ethically, would seem to imply that it needs to be within the context of this committed relationship. Otherwise, it's as damaging and destructive as is unfriendly fire. But when it's in the place where it belongs, then it brings warmth to the relationship. Okay, so speaking of adultery, I want to introduce you to an author by the name of Anne Roif. Before I do, I just want you to hear this quote. This is Harold Voth, senior psychiatrist. He's now retired at the Menninger Clinics. He talks about the effect of unhealthy behaviors in families, and this is what he says. The cycle of sick or weak people who are the product of sick or broken families keeps repeating itself. The effects spread from one generation to the next, and slowly but surely the sickness tears down the best traditions of humankind which have made our society strong. If we perpetuate unfaithfulness in marriage, if we set an example for the children that we may someday have, or even for family and friends of unfaithfulness, it has repercussions. It doesn't just harm my mate. It harms more than just my mate. So here's Anne Roif's book. This is the American copy of the cover, her book produced in the United States. The book is called Married: A Fine Predicament. Now you're too young, most all of you, to know that phrase, a fine predicament. Where does that come from? It comes from a humorous show of times gone by called Laurel and Hardy. And in Laurel and Hardy, this famous saying was, "It's another fine predicament you've gotten us into, Ollie." And so a fine predicament is a humorous phrase, but she's saying that marriage is a fine predicament. Or you could think of the old Huey Lewis song, "Yes, it's true, I am happy to be stuck with you." And so it's trying to have a play on words here. So this is the British cover of the book. In England, I said to you, Anne Roif is a little bit more maybe I didn't say to you yet. She's more popular in England, even though she's an American author, than she is here in the States. The Sunday Telegraph is an English newspaper, and you can see down below at the bottom of the cover, it says, "My copy is marked with scrawls of yes, exclamation point. I shall have to buy more to give away as wedding presents." So this is from that book, from Married: A Fine Predicament. Anne Roif writes, "There have been opportunities. I'm at lunch with a man who has invited me out to discuss a book project he'd like to work on with me. Before the coffee arrives, he tells me he wants one more adventure in his life before age binds him to his home. I think he wants to climb a mountain or fly an airplane. It seems he wants to have an affair with me. He is appealing and he smiles at me. What could be wrong, he says. It will be our secret. He offers a little excitement that won't hurt anybody. He takes my hand. I am pleased." She's flattered. "When you're a married woman, this does not happen very often. My feathers must still be shining," she says. "Why not? No one would have to know. I could play. I don't believe that sexual pleasure beyond the marital license is a serious sin. I don't believe in my immortal soul. My mortal soul gives me trouble enough. But then," she says, "I think of something far worse than sin. I could hurt my husband, whom I would never hurt, not for a second, and I would hurt him if even for one afternoon I went with this man and let him touch my body that knows so well my husband's body. I would defile the thing we do with each other in the bed when the children are sleeping. I'm not sorry that the man has asked me. A woman likes to know that her options are still there. But I am certain that I will not accept. I'm not afraid my husband will find out. That's not my fear. I'm afraid that my knowing that I had been unfaithful to him will slide into my life with him, will destroy some absolute closeness that we have achieved. You need to think in terms of attachment theory, what we've already covered. Will harm us both in some unknown way. I wonder if I'm just too conventional, afraid of life, too cautious for a swim in the wide sea. That's possible. But I have known what it's like to be alone in the world, and I have known that I could not harm my love or even bring it into dangerous waters. Maybe this is fear. Maybe this is what we mean by love. I would not break his trust in me. After all," she says, "my trust in him is the cornerstone of my life, and all would tumble down without it." You need to again hear the attachment theory truths in that. That's the reality of being attached to somebody, that if you lose the one to whom you're attached, your life tumbles down. I drink my coffee and go home. Monogamy has its price, she says, but it has its rewards too. Would I be a more interesting person, a better lover to my spouse? I don't think she means lover by treating him in a loving fashion, but better sexually, able to perform better. A wiser woman. Had I met this one or that one in this place or that? I will never know. What I do know is that, reasonable or not, to be with another man in the ways I am with my husband is unthinkable, would violate the web of life that we have spun together, would jar and tear at the very roots of our trust. And I want to say, folks, if you hear her talking like this and you hear the way she's expressing herself, and she's as popular a woman as she is, as the author that she is, my guess is that the man on the other side of this relationship feels similarly towards his wife. So I want to ask you a question as young people in college. How do you think novelist Katie Royf, who also, there's some of Katie's writing in your book, in the Wolf textbook, Katie Royf is quoted. How do you think novelist Katie Royf feels about her mom's decision to conduct her life that way with Katie's dad? In other words, how do you think that Katie feels about mom being loyal to dad? Well, it matters. Even if you're an adult, even if you're all grown up, it matters whether or not your mom and dad are faithful to one another. Some of you chose the dilemma for the midterm where you dealt with Biff finding out that his father, Willie Loman, was being unfaithful to his mother. Some of you recognize where that came from. Many of you did not. It comes from a well-known book by Arthur Miller called Death of a Salesman. But to find out that your father is cheating on your mom, or vice versa, would undermine your world. It is very disturbing to discover that kind of a thing. Whereas to know that mom and dad love each other and are faithful to one another is a very satisfying thing. So in a marital relationship, how many people are actually affected by an act of infidelity? Think it through. I've been married to my wife for 43 years. I did my schooling in Florida, in Tennessee, and over in England. And the bulk of the previous 5 years before I had my PhD was to be over in England. I was gone to England about 6 weeks or more each year. And there certainly were opportunities, had I wanted to pursue them, to be with somebody other than my spouse. I never was. But if I had been, how many people would I potentially hurt? Just Deb? Just my spouse? We have 4 adult children, and we have 4 in-law children. We have 13 grandchildren, and the truth is I'm clergy, and I'm a figure who is seen publicly in our community. How many people's lives would that have an impact on? How selfish an act would it be for me to be unfaithful to my wife? So the ripple effect of unfaithfulness in a relationship is really hard to measure. You betray the trust of more than just one person when this happens. So I want to say something here that I think is significant, and it's not directly tied to adultery, it's tied to fidelity. If you keep the fire in the fireplace over the course of time, it typically pays a lot of dividends or benefits that you might never have expected. Your sexuality is such a rich thing with so much potential that you may never have thought of some of its possible benefits. Out of your sexuality, in the context of marriage, comes the chance to have children that aren't yours biologically, but who nevertheless look to you as a mother or a father. One of the cases in point is Meg Haskell and her dad, and there's a page in this module that addresses her stepfather and the love that she had for their stepfather. Her mom died, and her stepfather lived to be 103, and so he was in her life a lot longer than her mom was. And you just think about it, if this is the person who was your mother or your father's life partner with whom they were intimate across the years, they're the closest connection you have to the parent that you've lost. He used to tell her how much when you get to that page, he would tell her how proud her mom would have been of her. Well, that's the closest she could get to having her mom's words, actual words, telling her how proud she was, to have her mom's intimate life partner, her husband, tell her that. So going forward here, I've shown you this picture with another video in the past. That's my wife and our 4 children, back when my wife was 26 years old. And with these kids, the youngest, that little tiny one in her lap, who was close to being a newborn at that point in time, she eventually got married. And I want to talk to you about an individual who came into our lives just about the time that the youngest, the little blonde there at the bottom of the staircase, got married. This is up at Sugarloaf. We were there for a ski weekend together as a family. And ultimately, this is our youngest daughter, that little blondie at the bottom of the staircase. And Corey grew up and went off to college and played soccer and had a soccer scholarship, and she got married. And so here's me dancing with my daughter on the left at her wedding, and at her wedding rehearsal on the right, us dancing together. And this is her on the day of her wedding coming up the stairs, but I want you to look behind her and to see that young woman right behind her. That is Ngao T. Kim Dang, and she's a Vietnamese girl we were her host family for a number of years. She spent the summers with us. And she was, of course, in Corey's wedding and one of her bridesmaids. And so you can see this is our whole family. And then over on the left, there she is. She took the American name Sylvia. And we became like her family. These kids were all, our kids were her big brothers and sisters. And she became part of our family. And they still call her, our grandchildren call her Auntie Sylvia and call her husband Uncle Matt. So if you have a marriage that's marked by loyalty and affection, then young people who either don't have much of a relationship with their parents, which was not the case with Sylvia, or whose parents are far away, which was the case of Sylvia, they were in Vietnam, they'll tend to be drawn to you and your spouse. So you can see that here I am playing chess with Sylvia and sea kayaking with Sylvia. And ultimately, this is Sylvia giving her senior talk that she had to give at Maine Central Institute. It's her senior project that she's presenting. And this is her at her graduation. You can see that she has a National Honor Society ribbon and medal around her neck. This is me walking her down the aisle for her to get married in Santa Ana, California. She calls me her American daddy. And she actually moved here to Pittsfield and taught in our local school district after she got her master's degree, so that she could be with our family and be close to our family. And it's me, I get to dance not only with my own daughter biologically at her wedding, but I got to dance with Sylvia at her wedding as well. And I wouldn't have that in my life. I wouldn't have that opportunity if it weren't for the faithful relationship between my wife and myself. This is Sylvia with her first baby bump. And this is she and her husband Matt with the shoes that they bought for their baby who's about to be born. And this is him. His name is Scott. My name is actually William Scott. He's named after me. And that's the kind of connection you can have to somebody who's not biologically at all your family. This is her with her second baby bump. I have her permission, by the way, to use all of this. I asked her. So here's our third daughter, and her husband and her kids with us in Campobello Island, New Brunswick. They came up and spent a week with me there. About 2018, I want to say it was. So this is the kind of thing that comes out of having a relationship with your spouse where you're loyal to them. You have other, so Sylvia is the one I'm showing you here, but we have three other young people, a guy and two other girls in the life of our family across time who considered us to be like family to them. Faithfulness and fidelity, as Anne Royce said, have their price tags, but they also have their payoffs. And so I just want to encourage you, going forward into your adult life and your future vocation, that you would think in terms of long-term faithfulness, that if you're an individual who makes those vows, that you would keep those vows. And if you're in a committed relationship in the here and now, that you'd be faithful. If you want to be out of the relationship, let the person know, but don't cheat.